I want to start by reading from 2 Kings chapter 5. I'm not sure I won't be able to read the whole chapter, but um, it's a story of Naaman. Naaman was a commander in the Syrian army, and he had leprosy and he wanted to be healed. And he had a young woman who was working for his wife who was from Israel. And the lady told her boss, Naaman's wife, that there's a prophet in Israel who can heal you. And so what's interesting now in verse, and I'll tell you why it's relevant, verse 5, he says, let me go to the king. Note the king. He was told about a prophet, but he said no, he went for the king. So he sends 30 pieces of silver, 6,000 pieces of gold, 10 changes of fine clothes. And he says, this is to introduce my officer. I want you to cure him of his disease. So the king of Israel panics when he receives this letter because he's like, I don't know how to heal people. And then Elisha, who the prophet, tells him, oh, don't worry. You send him over to me. We will show them that there's a prophet in Israel. I like that arrogance. It's an arrogance of knowledge, pride, and he's proud that he has something that he can do. So Naaman is sent to Elisha. And then Elisha, still quite arrogant, he doesn't go to meet Naaman. He sends a servant to go and tell Naaman, go and tell Naaman to wash in the river Jordan. And Naaman gets so angry because he's like, who are you for you to come and send somebody to me and you can't even come out? And then on top of that, you're telling me to go and wash in the rivers of Israel, as if we have no rivers. And then this is what the servants say. Maybe this is now where I should read. Verse 13. His servants went up to him and said, Sir, if the prophet had told you to do something difficult, you would have done it. Now, why can't you just wash yourself, as he said, and be cured? And so Naaman went down to the Jordan, dipped himself in it 7 times as Elisha had instructed, and he was completely cured. His flesh became firm and healthy like that of a child. Now, why am I telling this story? You are here in the university for knowledge. And one of the things that I have found very strange about university people is that they find it very hard to deal with very simple knowledge. They want very complicated things like Naaman. They want PowerPoints, they want grants, they want big degrees, they want, very many big things, when actually what needs to be done or what needs to be thought about is really very simple. And usually a lot of these simple things can solve a lot of problems. But we here, especially in the academy, we want to use big words, big research ninis, and sometimes the solutions that people need are really very simple. And this was what I was saying last time when I was telling you about ChatGPT. Yeah, I thought I had communicated to the students, what I want you to do is to learn how to write. So put your fingers on the keyboard, have an idea, write about it. But it seemed so simple. It was just too simple. They were like, no, madam can't really want to know what I think. It must be very complicated, And so they go looking for very big words, very big papers, and give me a very out there thing when all I wanted to know was, what do you think about this? And that's how it seems that we have started. We treat knowledge that way, like it's something big there, gold, silver, new clothes, big rivers. And all we are being asked to do is to think very simply. But I want to finish off with the story. So Naaman gets well. He goes to Elisha, and Elisha says, then he tells Elisha, give with gifts. And Elisha says, no, that's not what I want. It's okay. And Naaman is confused. He's like, but how? I mean, look at what you've done for me. Um, and then Elisha just tells him, verse 19, go in peace. And Naaman leaves. Again, there's a misunderstanding from Naaman. Not only is he thinking big power, bureaucracy, material, but he's also thinking that I have to pay you. And what Elisha was doing was out of generosity, not just the generosity of his own heart, but what was Elisha's goal? It was to show that there is a prophet, that Israel serves a God who can heal. That's all. So when he's being offered material things, Elisha says, no, I don't want that. But as now Naaman goes, Elisha's servant says, Aye, how is it that my master has let Naaman go away without paying a thing? I will run after him. This is typical Kenya corruption. He runs after him and says, my master sent me to tell you just how now two members of the group of prophets in the hill country of Ephraim arrived, and he would like you to give them 3,000 pieces of silver and 2 changes of fine clothes. And then Naaman, because his mind has not been transformed, he's still thinking materialist, in the materialist way. He says, of course, in fact, take double what you're asking for. And he gives the servant double. And then the servant goes back to Elisha towards the end of the chapter. And Elisha asks him, where have you been? The servant says, oh, nowhere. Ha! He's lying. So this is the second time he has lied. So you can see what happens. Once you lie once, you have to lie again to cover up the last lie. So Elisha says, wasn't I there in spirit when the man got out of his chariot to meet you? This is no time to accept money and clothes, olive groves and vineyards, sheep and cattle or servants. And now Naaman's disease will be upon you, and you and your descendants will have it forever. And when Gehazi, the servant, left, he had the disease. So this disease is not just the fact that his skin was now infected. It's that Gehazi had the mind of Naaman. He was looking at knowledge as something that should give you material rewards. And yet when Elisha is using his knowledge, his spiritual powers, he's doing it out of the generosity of a human being to another without expecting any payment. This is the strange land I was telling you about 2 weeks ago, that knowledge in Kenya has become something to trade with. That's why when you tell students to do very small things, they can't believe that you're asking for something very small. Other times they can't believe that you're doing it out of generosity. They think, no, there must be a catch somewhere. You must want some payment somewhere. And they behave like Naaman and say, no, you can't be asking me for something very simple. But yes, I am. I'm asking for very simple things. So this is related to knowledge because Kenya has complicated and corrupted knowledge so much that we can't think straight. We can't think about simple things. And even if when people give out of the generosity of their hearts, we don't know how to understand that. We say, no, let me pay you, because that's what we understand. And when we don't pay, we use that for corruption. And later on in the semester, I'm going to show you how far corrupt research can go. When people don't want to study for the generosity of society, for the generosity of making people well, for the generosity of helping people think differently about things, then we are told, no, let's pay you. There must be a price. And I'm not talking about work. There are times when if I do the work, I need to be paid for the work that I do because I need to live. But there are times when some of us, especially when we comment in the public, we are doing it out of generosity because we want Kenya to improve. And just this week, people have been telling me, I don't know, because we cannot be human beings if we don't know things and know them without any strings attached. know them so that we can improve ourselves and so that we can be generous to one another, which was what Elisha was doing. That's a world that has become very rare in Kenya. But I am, like I said, I'm singing a song in a strange land. I will keep on singing the song that we must study. We must study because we want to be generous to our people. Our people are suffering. We are being bombarded with questions and issues that we barely understand. And the people who have the opportunity to study are taking shortcuts, bribing other people to do the work for them. And in the end, what happens is that the disease continues, like you see in the Bible. I have called this content in academic work, not just because it's about what we find in academic publishing, but it's kind of also what you're going to do in your own, when you're doing your thesis, even when you're doing your term papers. So that's why I've called it content in academic work. So what I'm going to talk about now is just sort of like research for dummies. I'm going to tell you in the very simplistic language what it is, and then when you go for your introduction to proposal writing, now you'll get to the really technical definitions of these things. When people are writing their introduction, they're basically trying to tell you, why should the reader care? What is it about what I'm going to say that matters? Basically, the introduction is sort of to draw their attention to the reader about what you're going to talk about. Then you will see in thesis, people put background as a section, but in most academic work, you will not find people writing background as a section. But the point is to just say, where does this material I'm talking about matter? Yeah. So for example, if you're talking about curriculum reforms, which was what I was talking about 2 days ago, you talk about, to whom does this matter? It matters in Kenya, it matters in Africa. And in fact, there's a global movement towards reforming curriculum. So when you're writing your paper or doing your thesis, you're basically trying to tell the reader that this topic I'm doing it matters to people here, 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 and here. And this is sort of like what has been happening before now this particular problem I'm studying has happened. Then research objectives are basically where you're saying, what information do I need to find out? That's what the objective is. So, for example, maybe I want to talk about a cholera outbreak, okay? Maybe I want to know, why has it broken out in this place? So what information do I need to find out for that? That's what your research objective. So you can say, how many people has cholera infected? That's a research objective, because it means for me to know the extent of the problem, I need to know how many people have it. What information do I need? So that's where your objectives are. Do you need to know how many people have the disease? Do you need to know how much medicine is available? Do you need to know what are the sanitation circumstances that people are grappling with? Those are the research objectives. So when somebody's writing their research objectives, even though maybe they want to find out the cure or how to stop an epidemic, the research objective could be, where did the first infection come about? So that's the research objective, even though it might not be the overall goal of the research. Then there's the literature review. The literature review, you're basically asking, who else has talked about this? And what have they said? Why is what they have said not enough? Because basically you want to add to the conversation. I need to emphasize this because one of my frustrations when I'm reading thesis is that students just say, so-and-so said, so-and-so said, so-and-so said. But then I'm like, and what's the relation to your paper? What do you think about what they said, and how does it influence what you're going to write about? So it's not enough to say, this is what people have said. You also have to say, what have they said about it and why isn't it not enough? And what am I adding to the conversation? That's what a literature review is. People will not call it a literature review, but almost every academic publication, you will see people saying, I've seen so-and-so say this, I've seen so-and-so this say this, but there's this aspect that I want to talk about to contribute to the conversation. So that's what a literature review is. It's about who else has talked about the same topic, what have they said, and why is it not enough? And what am I adding? That's a literature review. A theoretical framework is about which ideas am I going to use? Okay. On Facebook, there was a debate about theoretical framework. I think people they overthink it like Naaman. But really what theoretical framework is that you just want to say, these are the ideas which I'm thinking of using throughout my analysis. People call that theory, which is okay. Sometimes we can use theory, sometimes no. Theory it's an explanation of a certain phenomenon. So for example, if I say we have less rain these days because there's climate change, that's a theory. I can also have a different theory saying we have less rain because we have sinned against God. Or I can have another theory, it's because we have polluted the environment. So you see, theories are explanations where people try to explain things by drawing patterns between different events. That's the other thing. It's between different events. So a theory is basically bringing different aspects of a problem together and say, this whole thing forms a complete story. Yeah. So you can have a theoretical framework that is based on a theory or that is based on an idea or a concept, but that one is up to you to decide with your lecturer. But even when you're reading, just look for what are the theories that people are using in their work. It's just basically the ideas that they're using for their analysis. The methodology is really, how am I going to find out that information? And what does it involve doing? Does it involve doing interviews? Does it involve talking to people? Does it involve just sitting and observing? Okay, so when people talk about methodology, they are saying, what did they do to find out the information that they wanted? Okay, again, this is one of the things that when I read thesis, one of the things that I notice is that students say, oh, I gave questionnaires, but they don't say, who did you give? How did you identify the people you are going to give? I remember one thesis proposal I read where somebody was saying he was going to give questionnaires to teenagers. I just said, teenagers don't yet have the conceptualization that this questionnaire is just questions, it's not a test. So if you give teenagers in school, tenor in school questionnaires, they'll think it's a test and they might panic. So you have to not just say, I'm going to use questionnaires, but say, how are you going to administer them? Using what? Are you going to approach people? Are you going to wait for them? Those kinds of things. So what does it involve doing when you're talking about looking for information? And then what data will my methods collect? Okay, so I give questionnaires. What do I want to know? I want to know maybe the age, opinions, or I just want to know biographical data. How old are people? What gender? What height? Whatever. When you're talking about methodology, you say, I'm giving these questionnaires because this is the information I want to find out. Because finding out that information will be able to help me answer this question. There's the results. So the researcher will say, after I went out, I gathered this data. This is what I found out. And you'll notice I put there field and literature. You can do research in the field, meaning going out there, asking people questions or taking data if you're doing biological or environmental research. That's in the field. Literature research is where you sit in the library and go through documents and documents and documents. Results are where you say, this is what I found out from my research. And then you can also say, what was I not able to find out? Because sometimes you will go out with some questions and unfortunately they can't be answered. Sometimes a catastrophe can happen, and so the people maybe you wanted to talk to are not available. Or like one student I had was doing a research on music. She was doing it just when COVID happened. She wanted to abandon the research. I told her, no, you continue with what you have, but you explain what happened, how COVID affected the research and what questions were left unanswered. So sometimes you can explain what were you not able to find out and why. And then sometimes when you go out there, you can also get results that you didn't expect. That's also part of your results. So results are not all positive. It's your experience in the field as you're going out that is you talk about when you're talking about results. And then you analyze the results. This is another weakness I have found, because Kenyans fear interpretation. They fear to say, what does it mean? Analysis of results is, what do you think the results that you got mean? In other words, you're being asked to interpret, and we'll talk about levels of knowledge. You're either interpreting or somebody else is interpreting their results. And this is where you also use the theoretical framework that you had talked about. You say, using so-and-so's idea about this, my data either confirms what they are saying, or it doesn't quite confirm what they are saying, or is the opposite of what they are saying. So you're analyzing the results because you're saying, this is what these results mean. And then the conclusion is, what do I think those results imply? This is where people really like to say, oh, the government should, we should do this, we should do this. But it's important to say, what do you think those results imply? Does it imply a change in institutions? Does it imply thinking in a different way? Does it imply different behavior needs to be taken? So that's what you're concluding. You're saying, based on my interpretation, what do I think should be done? And of course, you can see I've also said, what new directions do I think we are pointed to? Are there new things we have to think about, or new behavior that we have to do based on the analysis that I have got from my research? At the end of an academic publication, normally you will have the list of references, which is just the published materials which are referred to. You can put films, you can put audio files, podcasts, YouTube videos. You can put so many things, and we'll talk about that when we're talking about APA. Anything you refer to in the paper needs to be put in the reference list. And then the last thing usually is appendices. Appendices are primary sources. Primary sources meaning the things that you wrote or that other people said that have not been processed. We'll talk about that when we're talking about information. People also put the questionnaires as an appendix so that anyone who is reading can read the questionnaire and see what was it that this researcher was asking people. So that's what appendices are. Sometimes people even put posters, announcements, or it's a pamphlet or a manifesto. You know, these kinds of written sources which are not published at a publishing house or online, you can include copies of them in the appendices. Research and academic writing is really very simple. I find it very simple, but it's overcomplicated, like Naman, because it's really about the questions you have, how are you going to find them out, the answers out, what information are you processing, what do you think about it, and then what are other people saying? So the reason why I'm explaining it like this is so that when we are doing our thesis, we don't just quote people very coldly, like, I'm just doing this for the paper. I'm just doing this because that's what is required. No, the point is to sort of give breath and life to your research. You're trying to say, it's not only me who is thinking about this. This thing is not just about me. It's important to other people. Other people have said this. That's why I'm quoting them. It's not so that you can pass or not be plagiarized, but it's because to be an academic is part of being a community, because knowledge is made through talking with others, listening to others, and listening to what they are saying and responding to it. That's what knowledge is. It's not unfortunately, what the school system has done is that it has made it look like, oh, I'm the one who is so knowledgeable, let me pass down this knowledge to you. That's not what knowledge is. It's about conversation. I tell you something, you tell me what you think, and the conversation that we have is supposed to generate new knowledge. That's ideally what's supposed to happen, but we are not in very good circumstances right now that can encourage that. I want to finish with talking about learning and research. The Even though we are writing a thesis about something that is very specific, it is informed by the things we think about reality. You know, what is reality to us? How do we know it? How well can we know it? Is it possible to know everything and very well? How do we confirm that we know it? That also determines how we do research. And is it worth learning? That's it. You know, is what I'm doing worth learning? That's a big, for us, especially in the humanities, we've often been told that what we know is irrelevant. So those are questions that we kind of already answer without knowing when we are doing our research, and that's why it's philosophical. So the dimensions of philosophy are the metaphysics, meaning the world beyond physical things. And that means, do you believe in God, the spirits, the ancestors? Even though I might not say it in my research, like for example, when I see people behaving in a certain way, there's usually a spiritual angle, I believe, that is part of it, and that forms the way I interpret things. So so there's the ontological thing, is what is real. And this, the reason why I decided to do this was because I noticed that Kenyans have a problem with deciding what is real. So for example, like when you hear people saying things like, oh, that's your feeling, so it doesn't matter. No, it does matter. Feelings are real. At least for me, they are real. And I know for Cambridge Analytica, they are real because they used them in the 2017 elections. So the question of realness is a big question that most Kenyans, they think that if it can't be bought, it's not real. Like Naman, they think that everything is about money and material goods and solutions, and if there's none of those are there, it's not real. So what you believe about that will affect the kind of research that you do and how you deal with your data. Then there's also cosmology. What do you think about the universe, the planets, the sun, the moon, all those things? It also depends. So people who think that human beings dominate the world, they don't care when they pollute the planet, because they feel, but human beings we can do what we want to the planet, it doesn't matter. That reveals what we think about the planet, the universe. Then there's axiology. What is valuable? So what knowledge is valuable to you? So for us, especially in the arts and humanities, for the longest time, we were told that what we studied is irrelevant, is not valuable. And I think Kenyans still believe that. They believe that the only knowledge that is valuable is that which can build houses and fix taps. That's what Magoha told us. Then there's epistemology, the nature of knowledge. How do we know things? So if somebody talks to you, do you think that is knowledge that is valuable? How do you interpret that knowledge? So that's epistemology. And then there's ethics. What is moral? So ethics becomes important when you're dealing with human beings who might be ill, who might be vulnerable in any way. Maybe they are young, they are minors. So you can't just go to children and ask them questions. There are some ethical issues you need to to sort out, like, do their parents know you're doing this research? Do you have consent? That's what is moral. When it comes to which other, there's a lot of unethical research that has been done in Africa, and this is one of the things that we really, some of us really make noise about. Like, for example, giving medicine to people without them knowing that you're giving them medicine, or this medical testing that is done on Kenyans without, and yet those Kenyans went to hospital, they think they are being given medicine, kumbe they are being experimented on. Those are moral issues about how we know things and how do we get knowledge. And then there's aesthetics. What is pleasing and what is beautiful? For me, sometimes, of course, because I'm in the arts, I'm biased, but I think there are some types of knowledge that bring out the ugliness in people. And instead of making human beings better, they make them more selfish. So I think there are some things which are some types of knowledge that are not pleasing. They do not bring out the best in us. But those are the things that affect the way we do research. Okay, so what is research? I'm putting this up because there is a sense in which uh, people in the university think that people who are not in the university are not researchers. They are, because to research is just to be systematic in finding information and collecting it and analyzing it. So research doesn't have to be this very scientific thing we do with data collection and publishing and what is it that we do, defending and all that. It can just be even journalists doing some investigation. That's research. Or people deciding, I'm going to go and ask all my relatives where they were on a certain day. That's research, because you're being systematic about it and you're intending to interpret the data that you get. And then so research has paradigms, meaning it has certain assumptions that reflect your worldview or your philosophy. And for me, I've noticed that a lot of students, when they are doing their thesis, their assumption is, I'm doing this for approval. And you can tell from the way they talk about their research. So they will not tell you directly, me, I just want you to pass my thesis. But you can hear it, because sometimes when you ask them questions, they say, okay, I'll implement that. And sometimes you are not asking them to implement something, you're asking them to explain. So that's an assumption that knowledge is for others. That's another thing Kenyans do. We get knowledge for other people, or we get knowledge for money, but not for edification, not to make ourselves better or to be generous to somebody else, as I was saying. So what are the research paradigms? Quantitative is the most popular because it has no feeling. And you can be positivist, where you think that facts can only be discovered through measurement. So you avoid doing anything that has no measurement. And then there's empiricism, where you think not the best way to get knowledge is to measure it. As a person in the arts and humanities, I don't believe that. I think there's so much knowledge that you can't measure, which is extremely valuable. But when you have a society that doesn't value humanities, then people lose the ability to get knowledge that isn't measurable. And then there's the qualitative. So quantitative means it's in terms of numbers, measurables, collectible, tangible. But qualitative, there's interpretivism, where you interpret, and people who do qualitative, they believe that truth can be diverse because it comes from interpretation. And then there's constructivism, which is that knowledge is built through our minds. My friend Chichi was saying once on Twitter that when you say something and then Kenyans ask you, where is it written? Where is the research? As if you cannot be a source of knowledge yourself based on your accumulated experience. So that's another thing that has happened in our country, that we don't believe in knowledge that is not measured and normally printed by somebody else, normally in the West. And then there's rationalism, where you can use reason and intuition, where you think it's important for acquiring knowledge. One of the reasons why students don't like to interpret knowledge is because they don't believe in reason and intuition. And me, I do. And I often ask my students, so what do you think, or what is your guess? Based on what you know, what do you guess could be the issue here? Hey, people really fear doing that, because what happens is that in Kenya, when you give an opinion, people say you're imposing. And no, you're not imposing, you're offering something for a conversation. You're not imposing it. And then you can have a mix of both, which is the best. The best is to mix the two, where you have a mix of collecting data, but also interpreting it. And Professor Iro, the VC, is an expert in this. And I'm going to put a lecture he gave online for you to listen to, so that you can hear what methods sound like. Okay, so what is learning? I mean, why is learning important? Why is it important for us to be conscious of how we learn? It's because it's about what we know and the process of knowing. And I'll talk more about that next week. Learning, there are at least three types of learning, ways of learning. One is behaviorism, where you learn through responding to stimuli. And this one is the one that Kenyans like to talk about when it comes to our education system. They keep saying that the only thing we can learn is practical. I don't believe that. I believe there's cognitive knowledge where our brains play a part in what we know. I don't think we can learn everything through practice. There are some things which we have to know through reading about them, hearing about them, and our brains absorbing and processing them. But we have been told that does not fix TAPS. The employers don't want it. So that's a problem for me, and it's something that I talk about a lot. I think you need to come to terms with yourself, what you believe about learning, and because that determines how you approach your thesis and what you believe about the data you're collecting, the questions that you're answering. And then finally, there's transformative learning, where learning changes what we believe and how we behave. There's a sense in which cognitive learning has been disparaged, and Kenyans say we only need behaviorism and transformative. There's no role of personal interpretation or thinking or storing information in our minds. I think that's really unfortunate, but it's a very popular theory of knowledge, and a very unfortunate one, because it means that we don't think about the bigger questions like history, philosophy, theology. Our clergy are not doing theology because they have believed this thing that the gospel must be tangible. So for them, they think the only theology we need is schools and hospitals. So they don't have any answers to the questions that we are facing today except to condemn us, because that's tangible. Condemning somebody is tangible. So there's a lot of ways in which the Kenyan society has been broken epistemologically in terms of the way we know things. Our society is very broken. But like I was saying 2 weeks ago, we can sing a song in a strange land. Even though we are in a strange land, we can still affirm the importance of knowledge and do it well. But also it means being conscious or aware of what we believe, our own personal beliefs about knowledge, but also to be aware of the general agreement and stories that are told about knowledge in Kenya. Things like you must learn things that are relevant, things that are practical. There's no point of reading, there's no point of thinking. What matters is money, and it's the tangibles, the Naman kind of knowledge where you just want chap, 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 and you can't think about values like generosity, like integrity, like honesty. How do those things feature in the things that we know? And how do they contribute to making the world a better place through the knowledge that we are producing?